Hey guys, and welcome to another devlog video for the Animal Behavior Kit. In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys a quick preview of the new Activation Manager system, as well as some of the general improvements I've made to the animal spawners in order to help performance with open world games. So I've been working on these changes for the past couple of days. I've heard some really good feedback from some of you guys on Discord and on email. So thank you guys so much for the suggestion. I also asked you guys to send me some comments about your setups if you were doing like an open world game or a game where you're using world composition. And I gathered some of that feedback and I started working on some improvements. So what I have right here, as you can see here, I'm gonna switch to top view mode real quick, is I have a pretty decently sized landscape here, and I am breaking the landscape into sections. You can see here, the white is simply a just a mesh. It's a walkway. It's going to be an easy way for us to detect when we're going from one section to another. It's just a visual aid. But also, if you notice here, if I zoom in here for the first tile or zone, we have two separate animal spawner triggers, and inside each trigger there are 6 actual animal spawners. So the animal spawners are here, 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 and here, 6, and all these spawners will be activated by this one single trigger. So what happens is when you're playing in your level and you overlap the trigger, all these 6 spawners will be activated, and each individual spawner has a list of animals which can be configured individually, right? So you can have one spawner have one type of animal while another one has another type of animal, or you can change the density, right? So maybe the spawner here has 10 different deer versus this one here has like 2 or whatever, right? So what this allows you to do is, if you have a massive level, is you can break up your level into different zones, and you can put the spawners with the type of animals that you want in each individual zone, and then the triggers here will then activate individual spawners. And what happens here is when we enter the trigger, the spawners will spawn the animals, and when we exit the trigger will actually despawn the animals in this zone. So effectively what we're going to be doing is, as we're walking around from zone to zone to zone, animals in that zone will be spawning, and the zone that we leave behind will despawn the animals. And that way, even though we have potentially hundreds and hundreds of animals, if everything here spawns, we would have literally like 500 or 600 animals. What we're going to do is, as the player moves around, only the animals in their specific zone will spawn. So from a player perspective, this forest is full of animals, but from the game perspective, it's only hosting up to 60. I believe the maximum number of animals is 60, is 10 per spawn. So it's going to be up to 60 at a time, and that's basically the way I've set it up. If I go to perspective, you see what I mean here. Another cool thing is that these dividers, as you can see here, are going to be the zone where we are exiting one trigger, but we did not enter the other. And that's obviously in your real game, you would make the triggers overlap or get very, very close. But for the demo, I want to make sure that you know exactly when you're leaving a trigger and you're entering another trigger. And as you can see, the spawners here is exactly what you would expect. They're just arranged in a grid. In a real game, you would have them in strategic places, obviously. But for this demo, I just have it right here. There have been some quality of life changes and some improvements that I've made. And I'm going to kind of go through them, and then we'll actually play the level and I'll show you everything. So the first thing I added was to the actual spawners, and you can see here. The first thing I added was that now when the animals spawn, instead of spawning in the exact same location, right, it will be right here at the location of the spawner, it'll actually spawn at a random location, at a random place inside the trigger volume that you see here. So as you change the trigger scale, in this case it's 40 by 40 by 2, the animals will spawn at different places, and that helps with animals getting stuck, and also helps make it more natural, because now you can have, if you want to spawn like 100 animals per spawner, you can make the area pretty big, and then the animals will spawn and populate the scene in a much more natural way, as opposed to all getting bunched up together. Uh, that's one thing. The other cool addition has been this section right here, the player check, and it's on by default. And I showed something like this on the population control in the last video, but I've just added it here as well. In other words, if you do player check, what this is going to do is it'll actually do a trace for the player, and if the player is found nearby, it will not spawn the animals. Again, in a real game, you don't want to be walking around in your level and you don't want to have animals just appear out of nowhere. So even though we walk in here into the trigger, each individual spawner will do a trace, and this is going to be the radius, so you can change the radius. And if the player is found inside, it will actually not spawn at all. Only the ones that are far enough to give the illusion that the animals are already there. Another cool thing is because you can have many different animals with a delay. So for example, in this case, I want to have 2 bucks and 8 does. Every animal will spawn every 2 seconds. So even if the spawner is spawning animals, every single time it wants to spawn a new animal, it'll check for the player. So even if this has started spawning, if the player gets near, it'll automatically stop spawning. So pretty cool. And the other one is on the trigger itself. So if I select the trigger here, and this is the trigger for this area, I've added this nice little utility that automatically selects all of the spawners within the trigger area. So in here, I have these spawners here, which are the 6. If I go ahead and delete this array, instead of trying to manually add them, right, I'll have to go here and kind of add them like this. What I can do is I can just make sure that the trigger covers all of the spawners that I want, and I can just click on populate spawners, and you can see that automatically added, and you can see that there's like a little green trace just to tell you what the area was. So now it's a lot more convenient to set up your spawners anywhere you want and your triggers as areas, and you all have to do is press here and it'll automatically grab everything that's inside. So a pretty cool quality of life change. The other thing is that there's going to be a despawn repeat. So basically what happens is when the player exits the trigger, if there are animals that are active, meaning the animals are nearby the player, they will not be despawned. So what happens is that it'll try again after X amount of time to try to despawn those animals as long as they are inactive, right? And that is, again, if you have 2 or 3 animals near the player, you don't want to kill them off as soon as you leave the trigger. You want to wait for those animals to be inactive. So basically what this does is it'll try to despawn as many animals as possible. If it detects that some animals were active, it'll wait for, in this case, 20 seconds, and it'll try again. And it'll try up to 10 times to despawn the animals. If at the end of 10 times the animals are still active, it'll just kind of give up, right? Because you don't want this constantly trying to do this, as it can get heavy. But you can change those settings here. And finally, I know I'm talking a lot, but I promise you the demo's coming. I have an activation manager system, and this was a good suggestion from somebody from the Discord. And the reason for this is actually pretty simple logic. Right now, the default system has every single animal do a trace for the player and decide whether the player is nearby or not. If the player is found, then the animal is active. If the player is not found, then the animal is inactive. However, if you have 100 or 200 or 500 animals in your level, we're talking about hundreds of traces every 10 seconds or 20 seconds, which can get very heavy. So what I've done is I've created an alternate system, right? You can still use the default, but you can use this new system where it basically does the trace from the player's perspective. And then we have a blueprint called Activation Manager. It's actually an actual blueprint in your level that will then manage which animals are active and inactive in your scene. So there's a new component that you add to the animals. And in this case, I'll just show you, for example, I have two sample animals. The doe despawn and the buck despawn, those are the ones for this level. There's a new component called Component Activation Manager. And this basically registers the animal with the manager blueprint. And this component will be responsible for activating and deactivating the animal. The player also has a new component called Player Activation Manager, and you can see here that it has the frequency check and the trace radius. So again, we're going to be doing the trace from the player and communicating with the activation manager in the level, which is then going to go through all the animals in the scene and activate and deactivate them. So a lot more efficient, one trace, and then we're deciding what animals are active or not. And this way we guarantee that every time the player moves around, only the animals around the player will be active. So let me go ahead and click play here just to show you. And right now, as you can see on the left hand side, I have the activation manager on debug, and right now it's saying there are 0 out of 0 animals active, right? And you can see here the trace, the purple trace, which is going every 10 seconds, that is the one coming from the player, and that's the one detecting whether the animals around are active or not. No animals are activated because I haven't stepped into the trigger, but look what happens as soon as I step in here. Notice that now you have all these triggers here. These are the spawners that are now active in this zone, and they're spawning animals. Now, the spawner here, you can see is red, is because this spawner has detected that the player is nearby, so it's not spawning anything, but all of the spawners around are spawning animals, so you can see here, in a random location around the trigger. However, they're inactive because they are outside of the player's trace. So you can see here. And here is the player's trace right here. Everything that's inside this trace will be active, and everything outside will be inactive. So if you look on the left-hand side right now, with me standing right here, only one animal out of 50 is active. Right now, 0 out of 50 are active. And as I move around, I'm going to speed up here, and I get close, you see that now the animals that are inside the trace automatically become active, and everything else outside is inactive. So right now I have 8 out of 50 active, and I'm going to just kind of run around here, and then as soon as I get close by and there's another trace, now there's 24 out of 54 that are active. And the same thing here, as soon as I get close, they activate, and now we have 30 out of 60 animals in this zone are active. You can see you can see the trace here. Everything in here is active and everything outside is inactive, which is why you see the animals here not moving. And anything inside this trace is active. And of course, if I go all the way back and I exit the trigger here, now what's going to happen is that I've exited the trigger, and the spawner will try to destroy all of the animals that have been spawned, except the ones that are active. And this is going to take a few tries. You can see now that only 5 out of 40 are active. So there's 40 animals now spawned, and if we give it a little bit more time, I'm going to speed through here just to make sure that no animals are active. And you can see now that only 3 out of 34 are active. And it does another set every 10 seconds, 0 out of 23. And it's slowly removing all of the animals as it goes through its cycle, right? So you can see in 19, so it's very careful not to remove animals that are nearby the player, which is why you see that it takes a little bit of time. But this delay actually means that it smooths out the despawning of animals, and it makes sure that the animals that are only away from the player, you can see here that the animal has been killed, and then after 10 seconds this guy's going to despawn because it's simulating physics, and there you go. As you can see now, we're 0 out of 9, and if we wait long enough, eventually this will go into 0 out of 0. Yeah, 0 out of 1. And I think, yeah, there you go. This is the last guy, and as soon as this guy despawns, there you go. Now it should be 0 out of 0. 5 possess. You can see now that we're 0 out of 0. So in this massive map, I've exited the tile and all of the animals have been killed. And if I go ahead and enter again, same thing. It tries to respawn, and you can see that 0 out of 8 are active, 0 out of 12. And you can see these traces, of course, they are on as a debug. You wouldn't obviously not see that. But as I am moving around, you can see that, again, animals are spawned because I came back to this area. And only the animals that are supposed to be far from the player are active. And of course, if I move to a different tile, you can see that the animals here in this new tile are spawning. And I'm obviously going to go really fast here. You can see that now we have 69 animals, 70 animals spawned, 74. I'm going to go to another tile here. 83, but now you can see that it's starting to go down again. 77, 81. All of the animals from the previous tiles are going to be culled at the same time that the animals in this tile are spawning. You can see that the frame rate, I'm gonna jump in here. You can see that the frame rate is still pretty good because even though we have 82 animals in the map, only 13 are active. Which makes a big difference, right? All right. Same thing will happen. I'm just going to zoom past here to trigger the activation of all these zones. And you can see that the animals are spawning. And obviously, because I'm going really, really fast, you can see that, you know, I have 80 some animals, 85, etc. Normally in your game, the player wouldn't really go this fast, right? So you can adjust those settings as well. But the point here is, again, look at my frame rate and look at the fact that even though I have 74 animals, only 6 are actually active. The other ones that are inactive are just basically stuck, as you can see here, like these guys here. And they keep spawning, but they are inactive at that point. Cool. So that's kind of the general setup, guys. There's one more thing I wanted to show you, and it is the different inactive options. So if you go now to your character in 1.3, you'll see that there's a new option for simulation. AI run mode is by default run on proximity. That is the standard system that does the trace by the animal. Always run. Don't recommend it, but the animal will always run. Or use activation manager. Will basically expect you to have this component here, and it'll only basically it will leave the activation and deactivation to the component and the actor. And you can see here there are new options for inactive animals. If you expand here, now you see that I've added 3 options: make invisible while inactive, disable collision while inactive, and even despawn while inactive. So right now I have only disable collision, but if you really want to have it even better in performance, you can actually make them invisible. And this would probably be the correct setting for maximum performance. And we're going to do the same thing for the buck. If we come down here, we go to the options here, invisible while inactive. And what that's going to do is, and I'm going to disable, by the way, these guys here, the debug traces. There you go. Oops, not this guy. This guy is right here. And you can see debug player check. I'm going to disable it. And just to show you kind of how it actually looks like, on the player activation manager, I'm always also going to disable the check. So you're not gonna see the trace at all. It's gonna look a lot more natural as you would have it in your game. So I'm gonna go ahead and maximize here, and I'm walking around, and the animals that are active will show up. The animals that are inactive will be hidden. And that's going to be even better for performance. So if I go ahead and eject, you see that I'm not seeing any other animals at all here, even though the animals have been spawning around here. All right. So that's pretty much it, guys. This would be the most efficient so far. Only show the active animals. The inactive animals will be automatically hidden and eventually called when you leave your area. So yeah, let me know what you think. I am eager to know if this works out for you. If you have any other setup in your game, please let me know. This is still very much experimental, but I want to make sure that I give you guys these improvements for your open world game. So that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much. Let me know what you think on the comments below, and I will talk to you in the next video.